In June 1812, Napoleon led the largest army in European history into Russia. 6 months later, 92% of those soldiers were dead. What happened in those 6 months was not just a military disaster, it was a masterclass in how the most powerful man in the world destroyed himself through a single decision. As you consider the sheer scale of this catastrophic failure, ask yourself, what could possibly go so wrong that 629,000 soldiers would perish in just half a year? Before the invasion, Napoleon's empire was at its peak, with 130,000 square miles of European territory under his control by 1810. The Treaty of Tilsit, signed on July 7, 1807, had established France as the dominant power in Europe, and Napoleon's military had conquered much of the continent, including Italy, Germany, and Austria. The Russian army, led by General Mikhail Kutuzov, had been preparing for a potential French invasion since 1811, when Napoleon began to mass troops along the Russian border. By the spring of 1812, the Russian army had developed a strategy of retreat and scorched earth, aimed at denying the French army the supplies and shelter it needed to survive. As you look at the map of Europe at the time, you might wonder, how could Napoleon have thought that invading Russia would be a good idea? Napoleon's army crossed the Neman River into Russia on June 24, 1812, with 685,000 soldiers, 200,000 horses, and 1,000 artillery pieces. The Russian army, with just 220,000 soldiers, began to retreat, burning crops, destroying infrastructure, and denying the French army the supplies it needed. By July 1812, the French army had advanced over 200 miles into Russia, but had already suffered significant losses, including 20,000 casualties at the Battle of Ostrovno on July 25, 1812. The Battle of Smolensk, fought on August 17, 1812, resulted in another 20,000 French casualties, and the city was left in ruins. The Battle of Borodino, fought on September 7, 1812, was the bloodiest single day of the war, with over 70,000 casualties on both sides, and no clear victor. As you consider the scale of these battles, ask yourself, what would it have taken for Napoleon to realize that his strategy was not working? The French army continued to advance, but at a terrible cost, with over 100,000 soldiers killed or wounded by the end of September 1812. The early winter of 1812, which began in October, brought temperatures as low as -20 degrees Celsius, and the French army was unprepared, with inadequate clothing and supplies. The Russian army, on the other hand, was well prepared for the winter, with warm clothing, food, and shelter. By November 1812, the French army was in full retreat, with over 300,000 soldiers killed or wounded, and the remaining soldiers struggling to survive. The logistical failures of the French army, including the lack of food, shelter, and medical care, had become catastrophic, with thousands of soldiers dying every day. The aftermath of the Russian campaign was devastating for Napoleon and his empire. The loss of over 600,000 soldiers had weakened the French army, and the empire began to unravel. The Sixth Coalition, formed in 1813, included Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Britain, and was determined to defeat Napoleon once and for all. The Battle of Leipzig, fought on October 16, 1813, was a decisive defeat for the French army, and marked the beginning of the end of Napoleon's empire. As you look at the map of Europe in 1814, you might ask, what would have happened if Napoleon had not invaded Russia? The Congress of Vienna, which met in 1815, redrew the map of Europe, and established a new balance of power, with Britain, Russia, and Austria as the dominant powers. As you reflect on the catastrophic failure of Napoleon's Russian campaign, consider this: what can we learn from the mistakes of the past, and how can we apply those lessons to our own lives?